Hello everyone and welcome back to the Environment and Climate Change stream of the 2022 National Landcare Conference. For our online viewers and our people in the room here today, our presenters today are streaming in from online. So we have Elizabeth Goodfellow and Gill Hall from the Yass Area network of Landcare groups up on the screen there, and they'll be talking today about Climate Ready Revegetation, lessons from implementation in the Yass Area. So we'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Goodfellow, and this is my colleague Gill Hall, and we're with the Climate Ready Revegetation Project in the Yass Area network in New South Wales. And I thought before we started today, we'd acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're all meeting on, which is a lot of land, given there's lots of virtual attendees here today as well. And today we'd really like to talk a bit about the lessons that we've learned from our project in the last couple of years. And before we go into the project in more detail, we'd really like to also acknowledge the 50 or so people that have contributed to this project. So the project started in 2018 with a workshop with a bunch of nursery related people who decided we needed to do something about climate change and what we were growing and doing in our revegetation. And since then, we've had the core team of Sonia Deuce, myself, Jill, Kath McGurk and Sue McIntyre. But we've also had lots of people involved from the nursery teams and nursery managers. We have people who do seed sourcing and provenancing. We have people who are hosting planting sites and doing monitoring and planting trees, and advisors and funders, and lots of our friends from Landcare as well. So first of all, just thank you to all those people who've made this possible. And we hope that the lessons we can share with you today represent the huge amount of time and energy and effort that's really gone into this, but also that will make it much quicker and easier for you to do, because we've learned a bunch of things along the way, and hopefully that makes it better for you. So what we thought we'd cover today is just give you a quick snapshot on our Landcare area and the revegetation work that we do, and a bit about the climates to put us in context so you can compare it with what your place might be like. And then we'll go into a bit more detail into how we did the climate ready analysis and how we look at provenancing strategy and seed sourcing. We're also running a trial looking at the survival rate of the plantings that we're doing in the project and transitioning to business as usual. And very importantly, we've got lots of resources on our website and people you can get in touch with if you decide you really want to do this. So without further ado, let's get stuck into the next part of the presentation. So just to put us in context, you can see hopefully the cursor here. We're in the Yass area in the southern tablelands of New South Wales. And so, bottom right-hand corner of Australia is where you find us. So in terms of what that means for our landscape and climate, we're really a cool temperate area. So our average temperature is about 14 degrees. And the average rainfall here is about 670, 680 mils a year. Though this year, like lots of places, it has been an awful lot more than that. But what we also have is we know historically there's a really wide range of temperatures and rainfall and other climate characteristics in our area. So for example, here you can see in our annual figures here, we have 673 shown here, but in the brackets below, there's a really wide range for the rainfall there. And for the projected future for our area in Yass, what we're really looking at is it being hotter and drier and maybe wetter. So there's some uncertainties in the predictions, which means that for us, that gives us a bit of a different context to people who have a distinctly drier or a distinctly wetter outcome that they're looking at. So what that means is our seasonal rainfall also changes, the number of extreme heat days we have changes, and something else that's important around our area as well is the number of frost days change as we move ahead through climate change, and also depending on, of course, the pathways that we take and how our emissions change. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a snapshot of our climate. In terms of the work that Landcare here does, we have most of the groups do revegetation work. So there's 5 groups in our area. We have a group for Yass, for Murrum Bateman, for Bowning and Bookham, for Sutton, and there's also one, the Friends of the Yass Gorge. So we work together, and this is probably the first project that we've done, I think, as a project across the whole network. So hopefully that puts you in a little bit of perspective of where we're coming from. So let's talk about the project more specifically. So this started in 2018 with a workshop where we got together our nursery managers. So we have 4 nurseries in our network, and they grow about 2,500 to 5,000 tube stock each year in each nursery. So that's a pretty decent number. And all the groups have revegetation projects where they get those plants in the ground, essentially. So when we got started with this project, one of the things we had to do, like anybody who is starting in this will really need to do, is really learn the why of climate ready vegetation. So there's a guide produced by Hancock and colleagues, which you can find on the web. There's a link here, and you'll find lots of these on our website as well. And really what you need to wrap your head around is the basics of plant adaptation, how do plants change depending on the conditions that they're in, what the importance and value of genetic diversity is, and get a sense of the recent historical and projected climate for your area. And that takes a little bit of time to get used to, but really, I think in our view, every single group that's doing revegetation work needs to be doing this climate ready revegetation work, because what we've found so far, which Jill will talk a bit more about later, is that of the 80 species we have been growing in our nurseries, about 20 of them are unlikely to survive in our future climate or unlikely to tolerate it. So that means a quarter of the planting that we have been doing may not survive, which has huge implications for our projects as well as for our landscape and the health of our environment and ecology. So getting your head around that science piece and what's happening in your local area with climate is really important. But as you'll find through the rest of this project, there's kind of a science stream, and there's also then the how-to and the practical that brings everything down to earth really regularly. So the other part of getting started with doing climate ready revegetation is to look at how do you do a project. Now, Jill will talk a bit more about what climate ready actually is in a little bit, but in terms of getting a team together to look at how to do this, you really need a strong team and of a decent size. So we've had 5 or 6 people in our core team through the whole project, and that's really been essential. I think we've seen with other projects that have been done, if you've only got 1 or 2 people, it really isn't enough to sustain it. You really need 5 or 6 to have the skills covered, and also just to have enough people to share the workload and get things done. So that strong team is really important. The nursery partners are really critical, because someone needs to be able to grow tube stock or source seed for you that is climate ready, which means you need a much broader range of seed input into that approach and system. So the nurseries have to adapt what they do. You'll find you need technical support, so from people who understand climate projections, and also advisors. So having some botanists or ecologists, folks like that on hand are very helpful. And of course, you always need funding and an office. So all of that is essential really in order to get going with a project to make your revegetation be climate ready. But really, we think this is absolutely essential for anything we do with revegetation from here on, because we all want to be making sure that we're getting the best impact from what we're doing. So that's really where we start, is learning the science and getting organised with the team and information. So part of that learning the science is really, there's plenty of publicly available information about climate, particularly for New South Wales, but for the whole of Australia as well. So this is all things you can get on the internet now. And so if you start with the Bureau of Meteorology and have a look at the monthly statistics for your area, you usually find there's a few weather stations in your area where you can get information that will tell you the historical averages, that will tell you the more recent averages. The projections aren't in there, but I know the Bureau is working on linking their data with some projection information as well, so that will be coming. So get your head around really what is the local climate, what has it been, and not just what are the averages, but what are the extremes there as well. And that's partly to understand it yourself, but it's also because in working with the rest of your landholders and stakeholders, people always have their own ideas as to how things have been. So having some data to go back with there is always helpful. So that's the information from the Bureau. And then the regional climate snapshot comes from the New South Wales Government, the Department of Environment. So for every region in New South Wales, they've gone through and done some projections and analysis. And the graphic you can see here on the right-hand side is a really good summary that they give in those reports of roughly what's going to happen in the changes in climate in your area. The important thing here to note, though, is that that's for a very large region. So for our area, and probably for most areas, you really need much more specific data for your local area. We ended up with our council area being the sensible sort of scale to work at here. And to get that, you need to go back to the Adapt New South Wales team to get the more localised data, which we can put you in touch with them at a later date. So hopefully that puts you in a bit of context about the Yass area and also how this project gets started. And I'll hand over to Jill to talk about a bit more of the nitty-gritty of how we figured out what's climate ready and what to do about it.
Okay, so I'm picking up here on the section where we started to look at species. So this is a step that's necessary in the project to work out what's important for your own area or community and what you might be interested in. For us, we were always very action oriented to be developing climate ready plants to come through our nurseries. And as Elizabeth's already mentioned, we have 4 nurseries operating in the Yass Area network of Landcare groups. So our basic idea was to be producing climate ready plants coming out of those nurseries that we then distribute to our members who plant them in the landscape. But other groups may have slightly different views or interests, and we also have some other interests. For example, the ecological community that's around us in this area. So at some point we probably will do a wider look at the species across our ecological landscape, and this might be a focus for some groups who don't, say, have a nursery up and running already that they can actually deliver plants through, to at least understand what might be going to happen in your own district. And there may be, say, a focus on threatened species, for example, and in which case you might wish to know how climate change may affect those threatened species. Will it make them even more vulnerable? What can you do about helping that particular species to survive? So they could be different viewpoints, but for us, we started with a list of plants we actually were growing already in the nurseries, and there were 80 species, and you can see some of the list there on the left. So we made an effort to look at each one of those 80 species. So now I'm just going to go touch a little bit on the first part of the analysis, which was basically to work out which species among those 80 we thought would be more likely to tolerate climate change and which species we thought might be less likely to be able to tolerate this very rapid change that's coming to all of us. So here's an example of a tree in our area. It's a very iconic tree for us, the yellow box or Eucalyptus meliodora. And you can see on the map on the left there, the spread of this species, its distribution is from southern Victoria all the way through to southern Queensland. So each one of those black dots on that map of Australia represents where there is at least one tree, but it could also be a population of several hundred or thousand trees. And this data is all on the Atlas of Living Australia and also on New South Wales Niche Finder databases, publicly available. And there's lots more information about each one of those black dots that you can access through those databases. So there's climate data, there's soil data, there's altitude, and other local characteristics. There's the population size, et cetera, So having looked at the distribution of a species, we were then interested to know about the climate at each one of those locations. So if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, you can see that there are black dots also on the graph, and each one of those black dots on the graph corresponds to a black dot on the map. And what we've got on the x-axis is the annual average temperature, and the y-axis is annual precipitation. So basically we have produced a kind of what we call a climate envelope, which shows the distribution across climate of this particular species. And we can see, well, first of all, the red dot that you can see in the middle of the black dots on the graph is Yass, that's our local area. And you can see that the value on the x-axis is roughly about 13 to 14, and on the y-axis it's the high 600s to 700 millimetres of rainfall each year. And the distribution of the black dots across the climate spectrum, you can see there runs from approximately, say, 11 degrees Celsius up to about 22, and the rainfall from about 300 to 1300. So this tells us what the climatic distribution of this species is. And what we really want to know is, does this species already occur in areas with a climate that is similar to our projected climate for Yass? So we're interested in knowing about the projections for our area, and they have been superimposed on this graph, and they are the orange dots.
So the envelope is between those orange dots on the chart?
Well, the envelope for the actual species is all the black dots, but the envelope for our projections is between the orange dots. So I'm just looking for the mouse, and I'm not sure if it shows anyway on your slide, but you can see there are two sets of orange dots there. So this is a little bit confusing at first, but if you think about when the climate models produce projections of future climate, there are, first of all, multiple models that are used, not just one single model. And each model produces multiple estimates. So actually we have a whole range of estimates of what the future climate might be. And this is a reflection of the uncertainty that we have about projections. Obviously, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And so while we often see statements like we can expect it to be 2 degrees hotter in 2070 or something like that, when we use just a single point like that, we're actually referring to the average or mean in most cases. So here we're showing the full range of the estimates from the lower end on the left to the upper end on the right. And we elected to use the upper end of the estimates as our way of assessing our individual species. If you like, this was really taking worst case scenario, playing it safe, partly because unfortunately, global emissions are not really taking the nosedive we might all like to see. So quite likely the scenarios in the future might even be a bit worse than they are currently. So we're looking for species that really exist in climates roughly 5 degrees hotter on average than where we are now. You can see this particular species of this tree, the black dots extend well up to where the orange dots occur and even beyond. So we would assess this particular species as likely, more likely to be able to tolerate climate change. And we also looked at different variables, apart from what we've just shown you here, a bit of a snapshot, to look at different seasons, the hottest, the driest, the wettest periods of the year. And so we sort of examined it in a few different ways, but this gives you a taste of what it was about.
Because we know different seasons stress the plants in different ways.
Well, as Elizabeth said at the beginning, and also the seasonal changes that we are expecting, like the rainfall is going to be different seasonally from what we have experienced up till now. It won't just be a uniform change, but different times of the year will change differently. So having done that, for 80 species, we found that 60 of the 80 were more likely to be able to survive. So we focused on those ones and picked 40 for a working list for our nursery. So we're now working with 40 species. And for each one of those, we are now focusing on getting the best genetic diversity that we can for each one of those 40 species. So to enhance the genetic diversity, the objective is basically so that in future generations, when those plants, they're planted out, we get to the next generation, hopefully, of those plants there's a greater array of genetic material for recombination, the next generation and so on. And they can hopefully adapt. It gives more scope for better adaptation to what's coming.
So it helps the plants hedge their bets.
Yeah, so yes, I guess that's what we're really doing. Okay, so to get the genetic diversity, we elected to use a particular seed sourcing strategy called admixture, which is the second box from the bottom on that diagram on the left side there. So you can see there's one central dot with a cross in it that's darker, surrounded by a sprinkling of yellow dots. And this basically means that the central one is our local area, and that schematically, this is showing that we're going to get seed from sprinklings all around across the distribution of that species. So as well as always including local in that mix, we also had a bit of a tendency to make sure we always included some regions that were hotter than where we are now, because this admixture is not only restricted to hotter places, because we know so little about the genetics that, again, if you like, we're hedging our bets by going all around, because we don't know exactly which genes are the important ones or the combination of genes. So, but at the top of the diagram there, the top box shows what's called climate adjusted, which means that you're leaning towards one direction, in our case, towards the hotter end of the climate. So in our admixture for each one of those species, we're aiming to get seed locally from hotter areas, but also from a sprinkling across the distribution of that particular species.
And a combination of the drier and wetter areas as well, because we don't know from our projections which way the rainfall is going to go.
Exactly right. So for us, rainfall in particular is very uncertain. We haven't really delved into that, so we did have to make some adjustments a little bit around that point. Okay, so that's where we're up to. We now have admix seed for most of our 40 species, and we have had them in the nurseries, and here we are with a lovely array of admixture plants ready to go out to our members and to be planted out on mostly private land holdings. So we do produce, as Elizabeth mentioned, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 plants per year, which then go out to the different people and different members.
I think part of this project has also been our nurseries have worked really hard and have updated the way they do their practices, and they've done germination testing. And for people looking at the photographs there, you might see on the right-hand side, there's different coloured tags on the tube stock there. So the orange ones are showing us that there's admixture seed, so the non-local seed there, and the white ones are our local seed. It's a bit hard to tell from the photo, but we can even see in the nurseries, they tend to grow a bit differently. So there's, at least on first inspection, suggests there's something in this.
Right. So,
sorry to just interrupt you there, Jill and Elizabeth. We're just almost out of time.
Okay.
So if you either, I guess, if we can wrap it up from your end, or if there's any questions, or we can ask one question.
All right.
Is sort of
just if we could just show one more slide, that would be good. Okay, just to mention that we're doing a trial. These are our early results. So we're comparing local with non-local plants, well, from using seed from local and non-local area. So that's going to run for 3 to 5 years. And so watch the space for the data coming through. And then I think our last slide, Elizabeth, just to touch on that.
Yeah, probably just a couple of quick things. I think the key messages here really are, if you're doing revegetation, get into this climate ready revegetation analysis and planning, because it's going to make your work have greater impact in the long run, and do it now. Don't wait for the science to get any better, because there's enough to get going. And also the process has got a lot easier since we started. So we were talking about it the other day. We think within a year or so, you could easily be getting to the sort of point where we are now. So definitely do it. Definitely get a great team together, and a big enough team. You really want 5 to 10 people, and people who are committed, who will have the persistence and tenacity to really keep it going. And actually, you don't need a lot of money to do this, because lots of the information that you need is publicly available. So really just get going and give it a go. And also, given we're at the National Landcare Conference here, I think there's an opportunity for National Landcare to take a lead here and help Landcare scale up this work, because it is all very localised and species by species at the moment. So there's definitely an opportunity there. But if you're interested in giving this stuff a go and getting your revegetation to be climate ready, then our contact details are here. There's our full report is on our website, including the process of how you actually do this, and just get in touch. And we're very happy to talk to groups about how to get going with this, because it needs to be everywhere.
Thank you so much, Jill and Elizabeth, for your time. That's excellent learning about your provenance strategy and all the research that's gone into it. So if we can give them a round of applause, hopefully they can hear it through the screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have we got questions from the floor?
We've actually run out of time for questions, sorry. So we've just gone a bit over time with the presentation. So we've got to change over to the next one. But thanks very much.
Okay.